Let me see.
I'm going to turn my speaker off because my husband's back here and he's singing up a storm and I don't want him bothering anybody.
Just
Yeah,
breathe on.
yeah, you could put it on mute. Robert, are you able to mute everybody?
Yeah, I can. So I'll go ahead and
okay.
I'll mute people, but the only thing is I can't unmute. So if anyone wants to speak, you'll just have to unmute yourself.
Well, you could leave them unmuted then.
Okay.
Apparently, we only have a few people.
Cool.
Yeah, I'll wait till 6:05 and then
Yeah.
we'll go.
Give that
George
extra
may
time.
join us. I know George wants to join, but he had to run an errand. He must have become detained a little bit.
Yeah, this is rush hour traffic.
Yep.
Yeah.
So how long does the class usually run, Carrie?
Well, I wrapped it up at 7.
Okay.
I think 1 hour is about enough time. The book is short, the chapters are short, so it doesn't take much time to go through them.
Okay, thank you.
For those of you all who just joined us, I'm using my cell phone because my computer is acting up. Trapped. So I can't really see all the participants. But the reason why I chose this book is, first of all, I love it. I think it gives a lot of information that helps you in life. But secondly, it was the lesson, the epistle for 4 weeks during the month of September. Well, the end of September and through the second week or the first week in October. And the way I see it, if you don't really know what's going on, then you just hear the words. You don't know why Paul said what he said. But this book is what they call one of his prison letter books. Paul was arrested in Rome and put on house arrest so he could have visitors. And he was arrested because he was spreading the gospel of Jesus. And there were Jews in Rome who wanted to have him arrested, and they did. So he was arrested twice. The second time, he was found guilty and he was beheaded. But this first time, he was able to connect with some churches that he had started. And he started the churches, and they were connecting with each other by letter. And back then, the letters were delivered by person. And so this particular letter was delivered by a man. I thought it was a lady, Epaphroditous. I have to look at her name to say, or his name to say it. But this man delivered some money to Paul to help him out when he was in prison. And he was so thankful and grateful that the people looked out for him, that he sent this person back with this letter of thanks, just like we would send a postcard or an e-card nowadays saying thank you for all you've done. And so usually his letters were written because somebody squealed that there was a problem in the church, like in Corinthians, or in Thessalonians. But in Philippians, there was no problem in the church. And this church was a Gentile church that was the first church that Paul had established in Europe. And he established this in Europe early on in his ministry when he met this lady named Lydia. And he converted Lydia. And Lydia, really, according to the book of Acts, was the first person that he converted. And she was not Jewish, she was just pagan. And he converted her to Christianity. And she had her whole household and her servants converted as well. And so she went back to Philippi and had the church converted there. And Paul visited Philippi on his second missionary trip. And so this was a church that he really fell in love with, because he didn't fall in love with them because they were rich. He fell in love with them because they were loving and caring. But even back then, there was persecution when you were in a pagan society and you became a Christian. So he knew that they suffered like he suffered. So Carolyn is not here, but she asked, was Paul band-legged? And I had never heard of that term before in my whole life. And so I think Norma, you looked it up and said that it meant bow-legged. But here's what I have from Christian history. It says he was bald-headed, bow-legged, and short with a big nose, and had an unbroken eyebrow that lay across his forehead like a dead caterpillar. Boy, what kind of way is that to describe somebody? Okay, Claudette is trying to call me. Can y'all hear me?
We can.
Yes.
Okay.
If you answer her, it'll probably like just put you on mute, but it'll keep you in here. That's okay.
Oh, it will?
Probably,
Okay.
yeah. That's okay.
Well,
If you need
she
to.
hung up.
Oh. Well.
Yeah. I think she's trying to get on. If anybody knows how to reach her, tell her the link is the same one we had last week.
I'll give her a call real quick. I have her number. I can give her a call. So,
okay. And so that was an unauthorized description of Paul. And another description of him, which is considered more legitimate, comes from a book which was not put in the Bible called The Acts of Paul. And this book was written in the 2nd century. And it said that Paul was a man of middling size, and his hair was scanty, and his legs were a little crooked, and his knees were far apart. He had large eyes, and his eyebrows met, and his nose was somewhat long. Paul is one of the few people that I know of that was described in somebody's book, you know, not in the scripture that we read, but in the books that were not authorized to put into our Bible. Because a lot of people ask me, well, where is that in the Bible? The Bible does not contain everything. the books that are in the Bible, some of them were letters. Most of Paul's were letters. And there was a criteria that had to be met as to whether or not the information would be put together to form what we call the Bible. If the letter did not meet the criteria, then it was not put in the Bible. And so this book, or what letter, whatever, the Acts of Paul, did not meet the criteria. I know when I used to go to Barnes and Nobles, and I missed them since they moved from Regency, there were a lot of books that are not in the Bible that we have. Okay, did you get Claudette?
I did not. I called a couple times and it just went straight to voicemail. So I sent her an email and just sent her the link again. So hopefully she'll see that.
Okay, yeah, because it sounds like she is trying to get on.
Yeah. I'll be watching out and see if I get anything.
Okay, I don't know if anybody else is trying or not. But going on to chapter 2, chapter 2 is talking about humility and how Christians should act in their walk with Christ. And, you know, there are only a few verses here. And for the people that's new, I'll be reading from the NIV, which is the most common version that's used in most churches, except our church, the Episcopal Church, in the lectionary uses the new Revised Standard Version, the NRSV. And the language in that is very close to the NIV. I just like the NIV because it flows smoother, and it, to me, it has a better translation. So if you're reading along with me, your version may be different. That's the only thing about a Bible study. If everybody pulls out their Bible and your versions are different, the wording may be different. If we had a class at the church, I probably would hand out the NIV so that we could all be on the same page. So I'll go ahead and read. And if you have a question, you can stop me. What I'm going to do is stop along the way. It's a short chapter, and explain some of the things that he says. Okay. Oh, look like mine is getting ready to get on. But anyway, if chapter 2, verse 1, if you have any encouragement from being united with Christ, if any comfort from his love, if any fellowship with the Spirit, if any tenderness and compassion, then make my joy complete by being like-minded, having the same love, being one in spirit, in purpose. And when he's saying like-minded, people say, no, we don't think alike, we're different people. We come from different backgrounds and different experiences. What he's saying is you're like-minded in your love for Christ and in your love for your fellow man. And so that's your connection to each other. You're going to have different personalities and different ways of doing things. Like, for example, Bronwyn is a beautiful painter. So her focus is on the different things that she paints on. Might be the beauty of the earth, or people, or portraits. Whereas I couldn't do any of that. But both of us when we worship and when we serve, we focus on Jesus Christ as our Savior. So that makes us like-minded. And he's saying, let me see, lost my spot. If any fellowship with the Spirit, if any tenderness and compassion, then make my joy complete by being like-minded, having the same love, being one in spirit and purpose. Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit, but in humility consider others better than yourselves. And sometimes that's kind of hard to do if you know you have a better means, or you're better educated, or you live in a better neighborhood, or you drive a better car. But he's saying, don't think of yourself as being better. Each of you should look not only to your own interests, but also to the interests of others. And I thought about that part when I was in the office the other day. Because when somebody comes to my office, even though I'm deeply involved in something, I try to change my attention to listen to whoever it is, because they're coming to me for a reason. And so I want to give them my full undivided attention, just like we give or should give our children or grandchildren when they approach us. And believe me, when you don't, they know that you're not giving them your full undivided attention. Each of you should look not only to your own interests, but also to the interests of others. Your attitude should be the same as that of Christ. And that's the basis for him saying we should be humble and we should not think of ourselves as better. And here's why. He, who being the very nature of God, did not consider equality with God something to be grasped, but made himself nothing, taking the very nature of a servant. And we all know that Jesus was born to poor parents in a manger. We know the Christmas story, but he's God, and he, in his ministry, he did not go around bragging, saying, I'm God. I have the ability to do miracles. I came from heaven. I sat on a throne. He did none of that. He became a servant, being made in human kindness and being found in appearance as a man. Now, we talked about this in vestry. I showed the vestry, especially I started with one member, because his idea of what Christ looked like was more European, was blonde and blue eyes with keen features. And so if that's the way he looked, then he would have stood out in an Arab country. So Robin and I have this same image of Christ. He looked like an average person. He did not stand out. And he was so average looking that Judas told the religious leaders, he's going to be the one that I kiss, so that they could point him out from the others. So he did not stand out. He didn't have the long, pretty hair, and it wasn't tall. We went to Rome when I was in seminary, and there was this place, this church because they built churches over certain sites. And inside the church, there was a marking that showed you about how tall Jesus was. So we took turns going up to this spot. And I'm 5'8". And, you know, when I got up to the marking, Jesus would have been 5 feet or less. But that was the average height for an Arab man during that time. But when you look at the movies, he stood out because he was tall and thin. So he was being made in human likeness, and being found in appearance as a man, he humbled himself and became obedient to death, even death on a cross. Therefore, God exalted him to the highest place and gave him the name that is above every name. Now, one thing I like about the Episcopal Church is, now some people say we're not Catholics, but at the name of Jesus, we should bow our heads. We should either, you know, bow our heads or bow our body from the waist down. I think that practice is slipping away from us, but I really like that about the church because it reminds us of who Jesus is. And it says that at the name of Jesus, every name that is, every knee should bow in heaven and on earth and under the earth. And every tongue confess that Jesus Christ is Lord to the glory of God the Father. There is a song, I cannot remember the name of that song, where it's praising Jesus, and it said he was the pride of heaven and he was crucified on earth. So when he was crucified, they thought he was just an ordinary man because they did not accept him as the Son of God. But I remember thinking when I heard that, the pride of heaven, he was the one that was looked up to in heaven. Of course, he was God's son who he boasted on. So with that, you can realize what a sacrifice God made to send his son to us. And so that's the end of the first part of that chapter 2, which is talking about humility. And then Paul goes on to another mode of thinking. Paul is known for saying, therefore. So what he does is he makes his speech, which might be long, and then to get to the point of what he's saying, he says, therefore. So verse 12 begins with the word therefore. So after he talked about who Jesus was and his humility and how we should honor him, he says, therefore, my dear friends, as you have always obeyed, not only in my presence, but now much more in my absence, continue to work out your salvation with fear and trembling. Now, I have a definition of that fear and trembling. Should we be afraid as we do God's work? Fear and trembling. Let me see. Nope, that's not what he was saying. Okay. I apologize, with my computer acting up. I just Have everything all turned around. Okay. By fear and trembling, he says, therefore, my dear friends, as you have always obeyed, not only in my presence, but now much more in my absence, continue to work out your salvation with fear and trembling, for it is God who works in you to will and to act according to his purpose. Now, this text is often misused to instill fear into people, warning them that it means that they can lose their salvation if they don't do the right thing. What does it mean to work out our salvation with fear and trembling then? Paul can hardly be encouraging believers to live in a continuous condition of nervousness and anxiety. That would contradict his many other exhortations to a peace of mind, courage, and confidence in the God who authors our salvation. The Greek word translated fear in this context can equally mean reverence or respect. To work out your salvation with reverence or respect. Paul uses the same phrase when he wrote his second letter to the Corinthians, where he refers to Titus as being encouraged by the Corinthians' reception of him with fear and trembling. That is, with great humility and respect for his position as a minister of the gospel of Christ. Paul himself came to the Corinthian church in weakness and fear and with much trembling. Now, you all may have missed the first session or didn't get to see the recording, but Paul got a glimpse of heaven. Paul had a conversation with Jesus Christ, and that what he saw was so awesome and so overwhelming that he could have boasted. He could have gone around saying, I know what y'all don't know. But he didn't. He came to those churches as an humbled man, and he was mindful of the great and awesome nature of the work in which he was engaged. And the work in which he was engaged was to go out to the Gentiles. The sense in which we are to work out our salvation in fear and trembling is twofold. First, the Greek verb rendered work out means to continually work to bring something to completion or fruition. We do this by actively pursuing obedience in the process of getting holy. And Paul called that sanctification. Now, Paul was something like, he was an authority, a legal authority. So he came up with these legal terms: sanctification, salvation. And so sanctification means being holy, which Paul explains further in the next chapter, which will be chapter 3. He describes himself as straining and pressing on toward the goal of Christ's likeness. That's a high standard that Paul set. The trembling he experiences is the attitude Christians are to have in pursuing this goal. And that attitude is a healthy fear of offending God through disobedience, and an awe and respect for his majesty and holiness. Trembling can also refer to a shaking due to weakness, but this is a weakness of higher purpose, one which brings us to a state of dependency on God. Obedience and submission to the God we revere and respect is our reasonable service. And this is found also in Paul wrote to the Romans, and in the 12th chapter, he talks about this and brings great joy. In Psalm 2, this sums up this fear and trembling. It says, serve the Lord with fear and rejoice with trembling. We work out our salvation by going to the very source of our salvation, and that is Jesus, wherein we renew our hearts and minds. And he used that term in Romans, coming into his presence with a spirit of reverence and awe. So that means when we come into the church, like that song said last week, we've come into his house. We've gathered in his name to worship him. And so we should come with awe, with respect, with submission, with an open mind, with an open heart, with a positive attitude. And that's what Paul was saying with that fear and trembling. There was this process way back before Paul, where the Jewish people, once a year, they would come to the high priest with all of their sins. And so you can imagine what a burden this man was carrying. And the high priest was the only one who could go into the part of the temple that was so holy that only a high priest could go in. And once a year, he would take the sins of the people. And what they did was they would have like a rope around the high priest's leg, one leg. And so the high priest would go there in fear and trembling, hoping that he had all of the people's sins, hoping that they were honest and they gave him everything. Because if he did not come, this was what they thought, if he did not come with all of the sins, and if he didn't come to the place in fear and trembling, he would be struck dead, because he would be the representative of the people. And if he was killed or struck dead, they could pull him out. And that's why the leg was tied to a rope. So the high priest would, at that time, would approach God, the unknown God, in fear and trembling. And what Paul is saying, we have Jesus Christ, and we have this relationship with him, so that our fear and trembling is honor and respect, not being scared, but more of a reverence for him. So I hope that clears that up about the fear and trembling. Now, if you have any questions on that, let me know. I don't know if anybody has any questions on that. Okay, none.
No?
Okay, yes.
Oh, I just said no. No questions.
Oh,
You,
okay.
you explained it really well.
Okay, thank you. Okay. He said, do everything, now this really got to me, do everything without complaining or arguing. so that you may become blameless and pure, children of God without fault in a crooked and depraved, crooked and depraved generation, in which you shine like the stars in the universe. As you hold out the word of life, in order that I may boast on the day of Christ that I did not run or labor for nothing. But even if I am being poured out like a drink offering on the sacrifice and service coming from your faith, I am glad and rejoice with all of you. So you too should be glad and rejoice with me. And so he ends this chapter talking about Timothy and Epaphroditus. And I'll explain who he is. He's the one that went to visit Paul when he was in jail in Rome. And Paul wrote the letter that we read, and this guy delivered the letter. Okay, who is this guy? He played a key role in biblical history, even if his name is not immediately recognizable. He is mentioned by name twice in the book of the Philippians, and Philippians was one of Paul's prison epistles. Epaphroditus is the one who delivered the original manuscript of Philippians to its original recipients, who were the people in the church at Philippi. Now, the churches back then were house churches. They weren't like the churches we have now. People had church in probably the house of the richest person in that church, because the house was big enough. Paul complained in one of his letters that the people weren't fair because they would start the church service at a certain time, knowing that the poor people didn't get off work until about an hour or two after the service started. So they would always be late. So he condemned them for that. Okay, Paul was under house arrest in Rome, and the church in Philippi desired to send Paul what they might call a care package, just like we may have gotten in college or something. The Philippian believers gathered supplies and sent them to Rome, and he could have visitors by the hand of one of their own, a man named Epaphroditus. Epaphroditus faithfully delivered the gift from the church and then went above and beyond the call of duty. In his fervor to serve the Lord by serving Paul, he became seriously ill and, in fact, almost died. And when I read that part of the book, you'll hear him say that this man almost died. And Paul had the gift of healing, but it doesn't say that Paul healed this man. All Paul says is that God graciously granted him health. And Paul sent his friend back home with a newly penned book known as Philippians, which really was a letter. This is part of what Paul wrote. He said, I think it is necessary to send back to you Epaphroditus, my brother, co-worker, and fellow soldier, who is also your messenger, whom you sent to take care of my needs. For he longs for all of you and is distressed because you heard that he was ill. Indeed, he was ill and almost died, but God had mercy on him, and not on him only, but also on me, to spare me sorrow upon sorrow. Now, that sorrow upon sorrow means the deepest grief you could have. When you lose someone that you really love, you have sorrow upon sorrow. There's a hole so deep in your heart that can never, ever be filled. And Paul said he was spared this sorrow upon sorrow. And so he was thankful for that. And he said, therefore, I am all the more eager to send him, so that when you see him again, you may be glad and I may have less anxiety. So then welcome him in the Lord with great joy, and honor people like him, because he almost died for the work of Christ. He risked his life to make up for the help you yourselves could not give me. Now, he doesn't say what happened to this guy, what kind of illness it was. I guess when you write a letter, you don't have all the details in it, because whoever you're writing to knows what happened. So that's the way that happened. And so Paul said, let me see. Yeah, that's from his second chapter, verses 19 through the end, which might be 30. And he said, I hope in the Lord Jesus to send Timothy to you soon. I should have gotten you all some information about Timothy, but Timothy was one of his companions and a very good friend. And Paul wrote 2 letters to Timothy because he left Timothy to run that church. And many people believe that his second letter to Timothy was the last letter he ever wrote before he was executed. And that's where you hear the phrase, I have fought the good fight. I remember reading that at my uncle's funeral service. He had been a pastor for years, and I was asked to read that part from Timothy. So it says, let me see. I hope in the Lord Jesus to send Timothy to you soon, that I also may be cheered when I receive news about you. I have no one else like him who makes a genuine interest in your welfare, for everyone looks out for his own interests, not those of Jesus Christ. But you know that Timothy has proved himself, because as a son with his father, he has served me in the work of the gospel. I hope, therefore, to send him as soon as I see how things go with me. In other words, he was waiting to hear the result of his trial. And so they released him in that first imprisonment. And I am confident in the Lord that I myself will come soon. But I think it is necessary to send back to you Epaphroditus, my brother, fellow worker, and fellow soldier, who is also your messenger. And those people walked or rode animals to go from place to place, or went by boat. So we don't know how long it took this guy to get to Paul, and Paul to get to the guy, when he went there to start the church. Okay, whom you sent to take care of my needs. For he longs for all of you and is distressed because you heard he was ill. Indeed, he was ill and almost died, but God had mercy on him, and not on him only, but also on me, to spare me sorrow upon sorrow. Therefore, I am all the more eager to send him, so that when you see him again, you may be glad and I may have less anxiety. Welcome him in the Lord with great joy and honor men like him, because he almost died in the work of Christ, risking his life to make up for the help you could not give me. Anytime during Paul's era, their life was in danger when they spread the gospel of Jesus, because the Jews were out to get them. The Jews were out to kill them. The lesson that's coming up Sunday is from the Gospel of Matthew, and the religious leaders are trying to trap Jesus, asking him, well, what should we do? Honor Rome and Caesar, or honor God? Which, a debate of church and state, so to speak. And those religious leaders were always trying to trap Jesus so that they would have a reason to kill him. And so Paul, who took on the same role as Jesus, put his life on the line to spread the word. And he was so thankful that his friend came to visit him. It's like if you know somebody who's considered dangerous, and you take money and maybe food to them in jail, you might be thrown in jail yourself. And so this guy took a risk to leave the safety of Philippi to go to Rome to take this. So Paul was so gracious. And that's why this letter is a letter of love. Now, the rest of the letter that we're going to talk about next week, and we might get into chapter 3 and 4 together because they're very short. But this is the part where he's talking about giving thanks in everything. How can we do that? How can we have that peace? And I like the way Bishop Howard described it, so I'll have that for you. The way the bishop described it really moved me, and it helped me, especially in this pandemic, because, if you're like me, you want things to hurry up and get back to normal. But Paul said, be thankful for whatever state you're in. Be grateful. And that will get you through whatever hard times you're going through. So the next two chapters are very critical. Okay, are there any questions or comments? None? Okay. Okay, well, hopefully next week I'll have my computer back up. I'm really distressed that it's not working. But thanks be to God, I have a cell phone that does work. And so I appreciate everybody that could get in today. And Robert, maybe next time we could send an email saying that the connection that we have, that we started with, is the one that we're going to be using. Yep. But you may want to send it again in case people don't have that.
Okay, I can do that. That works.
Yeah, I was having trouble finding mine. Even though I
Yeah,
fixed it, I still was having trouble.
That's okay.
yeah. So it's a good idea, I guess, to
Mm.
send it out next week and we'll go from there. So,
Cool.
and maybe send it the day before and say, this is a reminder and here's the link. And so it'll be right there for everyone to click on.
That sounds good. That makes sense.
Sounds good.
Cool.
It was really good, Carrie.
Yes.
I enjoyed it.
Oh,
Yes.
you know what? If you don't know what he's talking about, it doesn't make sense.
No, it doesn't.
Mm.
I just read it. You know, I usually read it before we have
Yeah.
the Bible study, and
Yeah.
it doesn't until you explain it to us.
Okay. And you're in a group that's studying Philippians, right?
No, I didn't go
Oh.
because they were not doing virtual. They were in person, and I just really didn't want to be in a large group.
Oh, it's a large group. Okay.
Well, they have about 10.
Oh, yeah. Right now, unless you don't have to get out,
Yeah.
you don't really need to get out. But if you see any of them, you could tell them what you learned. So, okay, well, thanks, Norma, and thanks for everybody. I think
Yeah.
we had 5 participants, Robert.
6 of us. Yep.
6. Oh, somebody else joined?
Mm-hmm.
Delta.
She's hidden without the
Okay.
camera. Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah. So that was a wonderful lesson.
Oh, and Terry. Yeah.
And her husband.
Yeah, and her husband. Okay. Wow. I hope it's better next time. This was truly frustrating.
Oh. Well, it was
Well,
fine on our end, and I can get with you and figure it out beforehand if you want. I didn't realize this was going on. Otherwise, I would have.
yeah.
Robert, maybe get a cool pad or a jetpack in case. I keep one around all the time just in case I lose my internet.
Oh yeah, that makes sense. Something just.
What?
Yeah,
What's that, Norma?
they're called a jetpack or a cool pad, and if you lose your internet, you've got an internet connection through them.
Oh,
plug your
okay. And
computer into it.
Yeah, and
I can get.
you can get them at whoever, if it's AT&T or Vistar or whichever. You
Okay.
can get them from them. But I started getting mine because of work.
Okay.
Because I would go out to other facilities, and I would need to do CPR cards and give them to them right then, and they would be on the internet. So it always gives you access to the internet. It's great. They're not that expensive.
Oh. Okay. Yeah. I need to do that because we're going to be in this pandemic for a while.
Yeah.
Yeah, we are.
Yeah, it's a new way of living.
Yeah.
And so, yes, this is it. Now that chapter 2 was joy in serving. And so that's the takeaway from that. Be joyful in your serving. And I like the part where he says, don't argue and complain. And live a life that's humble. You don't want to boast and call attention to yourself. And some people do that to get attention. And some people call attention to themselves because they have a psychological illness. And with this illness, everything they do is about them.
Mm-hmm.
And so they can't help it, I guess. Maybe they need counseling. So, okay, well, next week we'll probably do chapters 3 and 4. 3 is joy in believing and joy in giving. Aha. Okay. Well, y'all take care. It's almost 7 o'clock. Thank you so much for dialing in. I hope you learned something.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
Robert will send out the recording. So those who tried to get in and couldn't, so that they could catch up with us.
Yeah.
Okay, so y'all
Sweet.
take care and be blessed and be safe.
Thank
And
you.
maybe I'll see some of you all Sunday.
I'll be there.
Me too.
Okay.
Thank
Hey,
you.